Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Red Lettuce. We have two very special guests with us. We've got Kayla from Anti-Conquista and the Red Chilean. So we've got a broad range of topics we want to cover today, from third worldism, American exceptionalism. We're still talking about Sakai for some reason. Maybe one day it will, implode on itself and people will stop being CIA ops in our movements. Who knows? We may have to carry ice picks with us everywhere we go from now on the internet. I'm just kidding. Please don't kill your comrades. It's fine.
They're not comrades.
So thank you all for joining. Kayla, can you give us a bit of information on your background, where we can find your work? And then after Kayla goes, Fernando, if you would please tell us about your work, where you are in the world, and what it is you're up to.
I would put it up if I could, but there's no room. My wall is only so big.
I'm Kayla Papucha, whatever. I am a member of the PCUSA, or rather a candidate of the PCUSA, the Party of Communists USA. I'm also a member of the Women for Racial and Economic Equality, otherwise known as RE, Black Alliance for Peace, and I'm a contributor to Anti-Conquista, which is a Latin American diaspora and Caribbean diaspora anti-imperialist media. So what I do besides school and work is I will write and I will organize and push our party politics forward.
Beautiful. All right, Fernando, it's your turn, my friend.
Yeah, I'm Fernando. I'm known online as Red Chilean. I'm a member of this party over here, the Chilean Communist Party Proletarian Action. In Spanish, it would be Partido Comunista Chileno Acción Proletaria. And we have a legal party, which would be, that's why I took this out. This would be oriented this way, which would be Patriotic Union, Unión Patriótica, which we used to run candidates alongside with other parties or organizations. One that people might know would be the Left Revolutionary Movement, MIR, Movimiento Izquierdo Revolucionario. That was like a very big part of like politics during Allende's time, and what's left of them, they're with us. So we like them, they like us. That's cool.
So Red, you are in Chile, obviously, but Kayla, where are you in the world?
So I'm in New York City, born and raised.
But weren't you born in Peru?
You say this every time, and I tell you every time. No.
Did you grow up in Peru?
I was there for a few years as an infant, but no.
So it doesn't count.
It doesn't count. No, I'm a New Yorker.
What a shame.
Yeah, well,
hey, we're all Americans here. We're all Americans here.
Yeah, we are. It's true.
Nuestra America.
There you go.
That's a different thing. That's different.
But if we were in Britain, we wouldn't be British, right?
How long have you been there?
It depends on your pay grade. Depends on your pay grade.
Yes, there it is.
Right. So if I make 12,000 euros a year, and I'm British, I'm not part of the labor aristocracy, but if I make enough to pay my rent and buy food sometimes.
Not only that, you're
I don't know, it's all very inconsistent.
Yeah.
It's very subjective.
Yeah.
It's whatever Zach Cope says you are, okay?
Right.
Zach Cope holds all the stringers. He tells you who is proletarian and who isn't.
I thought I was going to be the mean one. Never mind.
If you can afford your rent and you have air conditioning, you're white.
Yeah. Period.
But what if I can't afford my AC but use it anyway?
Yeah, then you're some other kind of white.
You're not quite a labor aristocrat. You're like a labor duke.
There was a year or two where like after I graduated, I couldn't afford anything. So I was like working at Starbucks, and I was making like less than $1,000 a month to live in Chicago, and I could pay my rent, and I can buy myself a couple of frozen pizzas to last me a week, and couldn't pay my energy bill, and it took me 3 years to pay that shit off.
Wow.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, it's gonna
Yeah.
take us 2 to pay ours back.
yeah. My credit is shit because of it. It's
Dude, that credit that's insane, man. Like we don't have that here. Like you can have a credit card and you can like have a lot of debt, but like the whole credit thing, that's wild, dude.
Yeah, we're the only country with credit. And
Like
the
like
fact that it determines where you live, like if you how to live. If you have bad credit, then you're pushed into more vulnerable situations with vulnerable landlords who are like, all right, pay me 4 months up front and I'm not
Mhm.
going to give you a lease and you're going to live in a basement apartment and there goes you getting a car, there goes you being able to send your kids off to education, there goes you being able to get a phone line.
Yeah, and I think like people like Zach Hope, they ignore the amount of debt that the average American worker has. But this is what third world, like we're going to talk about third worldism and why this why this position is inherently anti-Marxist and
very
Um,
very quickly for some people who are like, oh, in the United States it's like, there's no organization, there's no like revolutionary energy. Be like, man, look at look at the union struggle. That's like, it is rising up, it's growing in the US again. That shit's gonna start materializing. It's gonna start synthesizing into fighting against stuff like that whole credit system. It's gonna start materializing into fight for better wages, dude. Like,
yeah,
if you feel like there's no revolutionary energy in America, you're just not. You just got your eyes closed. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
well, they're the people that say they're ignorant of history here. There's been the United States has a very rich revolutionary history, and right now it's like probably the most revolutionary moment in our history because we don't have the labor aristocracy has been dismantled. 80% of workers live paycheck to paycheck. People are 1 or 2 paychecks away from homelessness and bankruptcy. People don't have clean water. People don't have, can't afford their electric bills. I mean, people have to choose between their medicine or electric bills or rent or food. So what we're missing here is leadership, and we're going to get to that very shortly as we continue on with our conversation. But we want to talk about firstly how third worldism and why it's anti-Marxist and why it's inherently anti-proletarian, and why it's petty bourgeois radicalism rather than it's Marxism. But both of you were formerly third worldists, and let's talk about how you change your perspective on that position.
Gayla, you go first so nobody says I'm speaking over black women.
So I used to be in the Workers' World Party. I was a member for about a year and a half. And when I had left, I didn't get enough strong politics in that party. And it says a lot because ultimately it is a Trotskyist party. It's not a Marxist-Leninist party. It doesn't have democratic centralism. And so that's why there was able to be a lot of factions that were going out. And I just happened to be, swayed up. And so I was, anti-imperialism led me to become a communist from being in the DSA prior to that to
I don't know that.
yes, to being a communist. But there wasn't much Leninist study being given to me. So I just kind of fell into third worldism. Though I'm not petty bourgeois, that doesn't mean
I wouldn't say most third worldists are petty bourgeois. Like,
well, if you
we've
let me
discussed it.
speak, instead of speaking over black women,
No, you got me guilty as charged.
does this mean that you don't have to be petty bourgeois to have that mindset because we live in the United States, we live in a capitalist, individualist, country, and so liberalism is constantly going to be spread into your thought, especially if you don't have a proper Leninist, study. So I fell into third worldism, and it wasn't until after I left the party. And so I have a fellowship at the Pulitzer Center to still go to Venezuela and, do a study on Afro-Venezuelans. I, made some contacts with folks in Venezuela, and this is about when the pandemic started. Now I wasn't able to go and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to go because my ticket was in April. But I was talking to my contacts there and I told them about some of the groups that I work with, some of the things that I believed in. And one of them in particular was like, you sound like a third worldist. And I was like, yeah.
Are you not?
And right, like and then we got into the conversation about Bernie Sanders, right? And he was like, "Oh, it's such a shame. I really hope Bernie Sanders wins the primary." And I was like, "Why would you want Bernie Sanders to win the primary? He's an imperialist. He wants to sanction Venezuela. He called Maduro a dictator. Like, you live in Venezuela. How could you want this guy? He would probably keep sanctions." And he was like, "Because he would uplift your working class, and you guys would live better." And I was not thinking about my own working class. I was thinking about, posturing as the most, best friend to South America, best friend to the third world. And he was, as Venezuelan, is thinking about my working class more than I am. And then he called me a third worldist, and he mentioned how the Cubans didn't like third worldists. And I was like, interesting. And I actually spent a lot of time talking with Red over here. Just, we spent hours on the phone just talking theory and history. And as I started reading more, as I started talking and sorry, and understanding better, this poor cat got into the door. But yes, so as I got more and more into Leninism and proper Marxism Leninism, because again, I was not properly educated in this Trotskyist party, and I was, mind you, I was in a faction, so very unprincipled. I was in a faction in Workers' World Party with folks who ended up joining Black Hammer, or just people that are not in a party at all, like whatsoever. And the ones that are not in a party whatsoever are honestly a million times better off than the ones that are in Black Hammer. But I was definitely lost there, and I was very ideologically confused. Like, I considered myself a Marxist Leninist. In hindsight, I was not. And a year later, after doing a lot of work to develop my politics, I think that I can finally say I am a Marxist Leninist, but I do still have a lot to learn. And I think that, being in, and since I started my candidacy with the Party of Communist USA, they also have the People's School for Marxism Leninism Studies once a week that we're supposed to go to. And I attend these classes, and I have learned so much. So between, the uprising that, we saw throughout the whole country in May and in June, between, learning more about Marxism, Leninism, and between actually communicating with communists all throughout the world, but especially in South America, I've unlearned my third worldism. I have learned how it is an ultra-left position. I have learned that folks that subscribe to third worldism are not actually interested in their own working class. They completely have a disdain for the working class. And you can hear it when they talk about them. When they talk about their own working class, it's like they are disgusted with them, and they over-romanticize the third world. And they treat it,
I would say they fetishize it.
Yes, they treat it as if it's not like they're not human beings who are capable of being rich and being poor, or being petty bourgeois, of, siding with imperialists. That slips their mind. They fetishize the global South, and they have a hatred of their own workers, and that's why they will be rejected. And that's the only reason why I think that it's important to not let these ideas go unchallenged, is because, not that they matter, the workers are never going to follow them, but in this country, I think that we have a very real possibility. If the socialists do not win, then the fascists will. And that will be our fault. That's our fault. So that's why these ideas cannot go unchallenged. They're a direct threat to building our movement. And if I could just ignore them, I would love to just ignore them, because they ultimately are irrelevant. But they're making us look bad. They're making me look bad, and I can't have that. They call themselves communists. Sometimes they call themselves Marxist Leninists, and they're not.
Yeah,
it almost, what you're describing, it makes it sound like it's some form of Orientalism that they're doing when they talk about like the third world. And
I mean, when they talk about like the Orient, right, like the East, they are, it is like an Orientalist view of like the working class there. But I think it's a more generalized form of I don't want to say bigotry, because they're not bigoted against us. They're just naive in their understanding about us. And I've talked to a lot of third worldists and like gotten them to like reconsider their thoughts. Like I'll get into my bit now, how I became and stopped being a third worldist. Like, when I started getting into communism, man, it's a long story, but like when I started taking it much more seriously, I was still in the US. It was like right after Trump got elected. I was like outraged like everybody else. How could this happen? and I like that just cracked my liberal shell. That was the initial crack. It takes a while to get rid of it all. Some say you never will, but because of that, I started looking for more radical positions. And I started looking online because there was no organizations in my city. I lived in Santa Barbara, and there's no real party presence from any party there, and there still isn't, as far as I know. I still talk to the people there, and because of that, on the internet, you're gonna find a lot of like different understandings on the different questions, like the different historical questions of socialism, right? Like, is there revolution possible in the United States? What are the tasks of revolution? Should we run elections? Should we not run elections? Those are all debates that a young communist should have. They should grapple with these questions because it's not. There's a reason why books are written about them, right? Because they're real things that need to be examined deeply. The problem is that when you're becoming a communist online, you can easily get lost and get sidetracked. And honestly, you shouldn't, like, if you are a communist and you're like, and you did get your formation online, you did get your development online, you shouldn't blame yourself because it's not your fault. But anyways, back on track. I ended up getting third world dispositions because around that time, and I think me and Kayla kind of have the same origin there. Like when you don't have a party or your party isn't giving you like, hey, this is what you need to read. This is the stuff that's tried and tested. You start looking online, and in that time, third world dispositions were very popular, and they still are. So you kind of just gravitate towards them because they're very popular. They get shared a lot. They get a lot of exposure, and they also on the internet, what has a lot of attention tends to be assumed to be correct.
Yeah.
And then fast forward until I moved to Chile in 2018, right at the start of 2018, basically. I joined this party, this one right here. And that was like the first steps I started taking to like unlearn that stuff. It was subtle. The first thing that really struck me is that communists here, and this is not just like a Chilean thing, we refer to the whole like academic Marxist, the radicals that come out of like a university. We call them progress. It's like a riff on progressives. The best translation I could do for English would be a radlib. And they're like, if I had to characterize them, they're people who like socialism, but they're not socialists. The people who they like
aren't words,
poor, but they hate
right?
They like poverty, but they hate the poor.
Yeah.
Right. So this whole fucking group, this whole milieu, as some people say, they exist here just as much as they do in the United States, and they apply the same analytical, like the same outlook into the Chilean working class that they do in the United States, or the Argentinian working class, or whatever country they might be. So they might be like, well, the Chilean working class is racist, they're reactionary, we cannot organize them. The real working class is the Mapuches, the indigenous. And in Argentina, like you get the same conceptions. And in my head, right there, immediately I did a double take. Like, hold up. I thought the third world working class, that was where the real revolutionary subject was, right? But I since I was in this party, they were like, dude, disregard that's a bunch of nonsense. Like the only people like that only flies in the academic sphere. Like it doesn't matter. And immediately, when you get confronted with that, I wish more third worlders like spend more time looking at like how communists talk in like Latin American social media, because like you get the same debates. You get the same debates between academic Marxists and real Marxists that are in parties that have to go, and they go to like working class neighborhoods. They have to go and get there with like and confront a lot of ugly realities, right? Like you see poverty, you see what that does to a human person, right? You can't really expect someone who's living paycheck to paycheck in a slum, to not be homophobic. That's not their priority right now. Like,
right.
Like let's be real. These people barely have enough to live, and we're expecting them to like take a deep analytical look at themselves, be like, oh no, the problem is your mindset. Like we got to fix some things before we fix the others, right? This kind of ties into another thing we're going to talk about, like how it's the most advanced sector of the working class that needs to lead the rest of the working class. And what does that mean in practice? It means people who maybe they went to university, maybe they have more education, maybe they have a better understanding of the world, but they have the humility to look at other sectors of the working class that are much more flawed, that are much more backwards, that are reactionary, and be like, and lead them, not disassociate with them.
Right.
You know, if you break off, it's like, oh, you know, the like the stereotypical working class in America, you know, the stereotypical working class white person, you know, they're a drunk, they beat their wife, right? They're racist. The stereotypical like working black man, and here I'm gonna get to some heat water, right? Like they're homophobic, right? Like they catcall women all the time. You know, the Latino is, you know, he also gets drunk, you know, he goes to a strip club. It's, you know, they're flawed. It's a huge fucking mess. But you gotta lead it. You know, that's the work class you got, and that's the sector that you need to organize, and that's where the power comes from. When you get them together and you start make them work for a better future, you can start, you know, that's when you can start working with them. You can start talking to them about like homophobia and why it's a problem, and how it you know, if we don't organize gay working people, you know, we're gonna have a problem. You know, we have a huge sector of the working class that's not organized, so we can't have that. If we're sexist, you know, we're losing half of the working class. We can have that. How are we going to do a revolution if we're missing half of our possible, you know, base? You know, once you start leading people, that's when you can start working at those things. But it's a process, right? In the same way that you understanding and developing yourselves as a Marxist, it's a process. You don't read one book and all of a sudden you're a Stalin, right? Unlearning, you know, reactionary positions the same way. You know, it's a process. You talk to people, you get them to understand certain ideas, you will get them to understand why something's racist, you know, what's a proper like materialist understanding, um and you start getting them there. And last thing I'll say on this, um the way that anti-racist positions get posited in the United States, it's deeply flawed. When you go and you say um like immigrants, let's just get this. Immigrants, a lot of people say immigrants don't lower the wages of people. I'm sorry, but immigration lowers the wages of people. Like that is undeniable. If the only argument that I've heard that's like half like true, is that immigrants do work that you know, white workers or American workers wouldn't want to do. Well, the reason they don't want to do it is because immigrants can do it for a price that's just way too low. So immediately, like if your response to that is, oh well, if you say that you're racist, I'm sorry, dude. Like if we can't analyze reality, then we're not gonna get anywhere. Oh no, if it falls, it falls.
I imagine that the Bolsheviks were like, oh no, we can't organize the peasants that are anti-Semitic, or these peasants that are, you know, they're misogynistic. They don't have Kollontaj's line yet on the women question, so we can't work with them. That's not the reality. The reality is the peasants and the workers in the Eastern Europe and Central Asia were very deeply flawed, but they all still had a common goal. And that's another thing that somehow these third worlders continue to miss, is that this idea that the United States is more exceptional, right? Like it doesn't have the same history as Cuba does. Like they'll say
we're the only place that's ever had Sutter colonialism. No other place
only
has
place
to
that's
deal
ever
with
had
that.
slavery, you know, the only place that has ever had the white ruling class, like,
Right.
or like the ruling class that's mostly white, like Cuba have that, or Venezuela has that, Chile has that. Everywhere in the Americas has that. There's not a place in the Americas that doesn't have that, and if they do, name it to me, that doesn't have that very same history. So they make it exceptional because the United States is one of the biggest imperialist empires of our time. But if you look at the Soviet Union, Russia was an empire as well. It had, you know, its colonies in Central Asia and even in Eastern Europe. It was a huge empire. And what did the Bolsheviks do? The Russian Bolsheviks were able to unite with those in the periphery of Russia, of Greater Russia, and set up parties over there. And they all together had the same common goal for building socialism and overthrowing the Tsar, even though they both had different relations to it. Though, you know, in Ukraine, the Russians were seen as reactionary. In Georgia, the Russians were seen as reactionary, but the Russian Bolsheviks rejected that history. And here's the thing, they rejected their reactionary history, but they uplifted the revolutionary and positive Russian history. They didn't say that they were bad because they were Russian. They didn't say that Russia was bad because it was
They didn't
colonial.
destroy the St. Petersburg cathedrals. They didn't
They did
destroy
not.
the castles. They made it a tribute to the workers.
They kept, you know, the beautiful aspects of Russian culture, and they were proud Russians, and they had every right to be. And that's how they were able to, you know, one, build the trust with the people that, you know, the Tsar had colonized, because that's who did it. It wasn't them. They didn't have the choice. The Tsar did that. They were able to organize with them, and they were able to organize their own nation and build one of the greatest countries that ever existed.
Yeah, exactly. And we have that history too. We have a really dark and very violent and a nasty history as well, but we also have a progressive history. We also have a revolutionary history. And that's what our movement for socialism in America, in the United States, would be rooted in. It would be a continuation of that revolutionary history. There's a lot of, socialism isn't anti-American. It isn't anti-United. It's very much a part of the history.
One of your biggest national monuments was inspired by socialist realism. I forget the name, but like the faces on the rock.
Oh, Mount Rushmore.
Mount Rushmore. Yeah, that one was inspired by socialist realism.
I mean, our Pledge of Allegiance, the Pledge of Allegiance was created by a socialist.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are you the Pledge of Allegiance or the national anthem? I think it's the national anthem.
Pretty sure
Francis Scott Key.
The Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. Yeah, it was created by a socialist.
Oh wow.
In American history, socialism has had a big mark on it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We need to start reclaiming some of these figures
Robert
too.
Owen,
like
yeah.
Robert Owen started some of the first socialist communes. Like again, they were utopian, but like know, it's kind of like ridiculous to like be like, oh, you're utopian. Well, before Marx, Marx was like the guy that put the science in it all. But like Robert Owen went to the United States and set it up there. And again, sure, you can say, and you should criticize it, that like there is a frontier ideology there. Like there is a settler way of like thinking about, oh, we're gonna go to the new world and create a heaven on earth. Sure, that's true. That's a problem. That's flawed, and you should criticize it. But then don't take dialectics out of history. All right. Don't stop moralizing everything. That's like, oh, there's only a reactionary side. There are forces at play here, right? So there are reactionary forces and there are like progressive forces in there. There is a progressive thinking, and like we're gonna go to the new world and create a better society. All right, like it's rooted in its history. You can't ask somebody from the 1800s to act like someone from the 2000s. You can't.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of blame on the masses here, but like we don't have the revolutionary leadership that we need, that other countries have that have succeeded in having socialism in their country. And I think that's what's missing in the analysis of third worldists. They just like to just cast off everyone as too comfortable, or like they're somehow benefiting directly from imperialism, which is ridiculous. I think we should also address this issue of why having a vanguard party and leadership is very crucial, and why it's responsible for the successes and failures, not the masses.
I've said this, that first of all, we don't live in a people's democracy. So if you're going to blame the masses, then you're saying that we live in a people's democracy, and we don't. Okay, if you think that there is a net benefit to imperialism for the workers, you've already rejected Marxism. You've already said that it's not the answer, that capitalism and imperialism at its highest stage is a benefit to workers. Then why should we say socialism is the answer if that's what you believe? Why would they want that? If the living to paycheck that they have is the best it's going to get, why the hell would they fight for anything that you want to believe in out of some idea of moralism? No, me and Red were having this conversation that if imperialism benefits people, then every country should strive to be imperialist. And now then we get back into these, reactionary sentiments of like, oh, it's survival of the fittest.
We go back to World War I.
Exactly. And so this is why I say that, to be a third worldist, and some people say that it's a false dichotomy, whether it be a Marxist Leninist or a third worldist, that third worldism is just an approach to how to view the world. No, it is a direct revision of Marxism. It is a rejection of Marxism.
And it's hard hitter. like you knocked that out of the park. Like I am just blown away by what you just
But
said.
if
I
I,
don't
if I
know how
can,
they think they can be Marxist-Leninists and be third worldists. Like,
if I may get ahead of a critique that you're going to get, like you know the whole Zach Cope take is that like, well, there is a higher wage in the U.S. Because it has more development, and the reason it has more development is because of colonialism and later imperialism. And that's true. That's true. There is more industry, more production, more set up centrally in the United States because the bourgeoisie was there. That's where they first set up their businesses. That gave people jobs. It created a whole class struggle that ended up fighting for higher wages. That's true. There's a kernel of truth in there. The whole point, though, fundamentally, is like, okay, so the proposition is higher wages came from imperialism, therefore workers benefit from imperialism. You gotta weigh that. You gotta weigh that compared to what the workers can get out of socialism. There's a benefit here, maybe, arguably. How is it greater than the benefit over here? It's not. It's not. And if a
Um,
worker, if you can talk to a worker and get them to understand that, you can turn them into a socialist. And if you can do that with one worker, you can do it with any worker.
Right.
Another thing is that they completely forget, and Zach Hope never touches on this, the amount of debt that we have. For
yeah.
example, I can make my wage can be 40,000 a year. I am worth negative 20,000 a year because
Yeah.
of all the debt that I have.
Exactly.
I am worth less than thousands.
I mean,
And how far does that
but-
actually get you in New York? Like I was crunching numbers the other day and I was like, if I'm a bartender in New York, I need to work 2 jobs to make $80,000
I had
to
3
live on my
jobs.
own.
When I was homeless, I had 3 jobs and went to school. Okay,
Well,
asked me how much I slept. 2
but
hours.
you should be proud American worker for having 3 jobs. You should be happy. You should be
I see that
lucky. You should
Labor aristocracy, because at least I get 3 jobs.
yeah.
right. But I've seen this a lot with the stimulus package and like the Biden like lowered the thresholds to $80,000 for Americans to qualify for it. And immediately I was thinking about people in New York and people in San Francisco and in these really, really high these areas where the cost of living is so high, where like with really dense population that like they're not going to get those checks now. And if they're making $80,000, it's because they're working their ass off to make ends meet. They're barely making it. Like there's no way that I would be able to survive off of $80,000 in New York by myself. Like it's not possible. And where's the benefit to imperialism there? Like that's
and a lot of people like Zach Cope and like a lot of third worldists, they also ignore the fact that a lot of the benefits that we do have, they were fought for by the Communist Party, by communists here in America. The reason why we have the minimum wage, why we have Social Security, Medicare, is because, and the civil rights victories is because communists fought for them. People, they organized people. They went out and fought for them, and they got cracked down on the bourgeoisie, cracked down on people here. It was very bloody and violent, but we fought for them and won. A lot of our victories were taken away, and people like Zach Cope and a lot of third worldists that buy his bullshit, forget what Marx said. Marx said, by looking only upon the change in wages and overlooking all the other changes from which they emanate, you proceed from a false premise in order to arrive at a false conclusion. And I think that pretty much sums up third worldism.
Yeah. That my wage is a little bit higher, but does that make me less proletarian? It doesn't. At the end of the day, the contradictions never change. I am still working for and selling my labor for a wage that is far less than actually the value that I produced. And I use that to barely make ends meet. I can make ends meet because I live with 4 other people. Sorry, 3 other people.
Yeah.
If I lived alone, it wouldn't be possible. Absolutely not.
Something I I got into a tangent when I was talking about like how I stopped being a third worldist, but like there was a meeting I had with my general secretary Eduardo Ortiz, where we happened into the discussion about like, well, what should we do with the Chilean flag after the revolution? You know, should we change it? Is it correct to have like the flag of the Chilean people in a plurinational state when we would, you know, it would be a state that recognizes the nationalities of Chileans, Mapuche, Aymara, Quechua, etc., etc. Uh, and Artes said, like, you know, regardless of what happens, the Chilean flag would also be a national flag. It would just also be alongside the Mapuche flag, the Aymara flag, etc. And another thing he said is like the flag of every country, of every nation, of every peoples, will be washed from its reactionary past by the worker. And he specifically said it, even the American flag. And at the moment, I still had like that was quite a long time ago now, but you know, I still had a lot of like third worldists like left over. And so I told him, no, I don't think so. You know, the history of the United States in particular, you know, it's more bloody, it's more racist, more settler, and et cetera, et cetera. He said, comrade, I simply do not agree, right? And that shit echoed in my mind for a long time. So I started reading about like, you know, I started comparing, like seriously studying like the history of Chilean colonization, and American colonization. It's like it's not any different. It's not.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who take up this position think that like settler colonialism is still a thing here. It's that's what the primary contradiction is here, and that's not the globe. That's not the system that we live under. We live under imperialism, and Lenin has laid out, and they ignore this. They ignore all the leaders and the people that say that they admire. Lenin laid out three main contradictions within imperialism. He identified that the first and foremost important of these contradictions as the contradiction between labor and capital. So that is between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie within the imperialist countries. The second contradiction was that between the imperialist forces, that is the contradiction among the various financial groups and imperialist powers in their struggle for sources of raw materials for foreign territory. And the third contradiction was that between the handful of ruling civilized nations and the hundreds of millions of the colonial and dependent peoples of the world. So that's between the first world imperialist powers and the third world. And they conveniently ignore that.
They only look at the last one.
Exactly.
That's a thing that a lot of the third worlders do. They confuse you know, the naive ones, they do it out of lack of understanding, but the Zach Copes out there, I'm pretty sure they do this on purpose. They know better.
Yep.
They confuse the difference between colonialism and imperialism, and they are different setups. They work differently. The whole economic and even state apparatus is completely different.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at colonial Chile, you look at colonial Nigeria or like Algeria, Uganda, any African nation, you had a direct rule from Britain or Spain or Portugal in that country, or Germany. The Germany set up, you know, Germany or the European powers would go there. They would set up the mayors. They would set up the governors. They would set up the whole state apparatus. Under imperialism, that you know, like the one of the big forces behind the rise of the independence movement is that the old colonial method of dominating the world was outdated. It didn't fit the modern forms of administration with the new capitalist mode. So these regimes were you know, you had the bourgeoisie inside of each country. Portugal is a great example to look at. You had the bourgeoisie of that country letting go of the old capital of the old colonial control that they had over, let's say, Angola, and you had certain sectors of the bourgeoisie that would resist that change because they profited. They were like an older form of bourgeoisie that would profit out of that direct control. And you know, like the African nations understood that. They understood that. You read like a Fremilio like program from 1980. They understand that very well. They understand that the new bourgeois order, maybe it's not an ally, but it's not the main enemy. You look at like an MPLA program; it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as those contradictions shifted, as the let's say, post-colonial bourgeoisie in Europe became the dominant one, the one that controlled most of the of each government. The and those countries got their own independence. You get Kwame Nkrumah putting up imperialism, the highest stage of neocolonialism, the highest stage of imperialism, and he analyzes that it's a different dynamic. You have financial organizations controlling the new republics, right, via economic interests. And it's different. It is a completely different dynamic. The way that those countries would then develop economically is different than the way they used to. They used to be forced to, for example, India would be forced to take in British textiles because the British had their textile industry was too big for their national market. So they would go to India, they would dump it there. After India gets its own,
same thing in South America and Latin America, the Spanish was the reparto.
Yep. But then after independence, India as a new republic, it's not forced anymore. But they keep buying it because the independent national textile production is frustrated by not by military actions as it was under colonial control, but by being outcompeted. You could just not set up a textile manufactory with the kind of return on investment that you saw there, because the British already dominated it. So it's different. One, you have a direct state military control, and the other, it's economic control. Right? Sakop understands this. Sakop knows the difference between colonialism and imperialism, and he consistently, obscures it. And it hurts the development of young Marxists. If a young Marxist gets like divided world, divided class, you're setting him back like 5 years. You're gonna have 5 years of confusion where they're reading a bunch of text, and eventually, maybe they stumble onto foundations of Leninism. They're like, hold on a second, this is all garbage.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like that they don't want a revolution here. They're trying to stop one.
Yeah, it's almost like they aren't Marxists, and they're
it's almost like they're not Marxist. Yeah.
Because they're not.
Yeah.
You can't be a third worldist and be a Marxist. I'm sorry. That's just the bitter truth that a lot of them are not willing to hear, because they think of themselves as Marxists, yet they sit down with so much disdain over the working class. Or maybe they want to move the goalposts and say, oh, it's just the white working class. The black and brown working classes, we're pure. We can do no wrong, because they settle it all down to wages, right? Well, maybe black and brown people in the United States make less. Well, understand that I talk about this.
Don't make more in the third world.
I talk about this 10 times a day about the superstructure and the base, but
right.
Like the base exists to it maintains the shapes the superstructure, and the superstructures exist to maintain the base. Now we live in a time. Look, you could watch the Jersey Shore, for example, 20 years ago, and 10 years ago,
oh my God.
And but really, like, we don't talk the way we talk that it was okay to talk in 2009 or 2010.
Exactly.
We would never be able to get away with talking about a woman the same way on a reality show today. That does not fly, because the times have changed, and the way that we view race, gender, religion, immigration has changed, and the capitalist knows that. And
right.
So they're going to adapt this and change the superstructure so that they can keep ultimately the base. And that's why we have Kamala Harris. That's why we have, Mayorkas as the department of the head of Homeland Security. Forgot for a second.
And that's why we have a black man on who's like a board of director of Raytheon as Secretary of Defense. And that's why there's no Asian.
Yeah, the CIA is woke now. The CIA is woke now. We did it.
That's why there's no Asian people in Biden's administration. There's like one that I know of, but there's no Asian people in
that's the real
Biden's administration.
That's the
we were looking it up, and we've seen that like Latino business ownership has risen by 34%. Like black and brown people and Native people too, all sorts of people that are non-white and non-men are being able to get into the bourgeoisie. They're able to get into the petite bourgeoisie. It is changing. We are not so much in a state where your gender determines what type of work that you're going to do, at least not here in the West, maybe in some other parts of the world. But at
Down
least
here, yes. Down here, absolutely.
down here, I'm sure. But here in this country, that has changed a lot. Same thing with the race. Now, there's still obstacles. Of course, women are still being pushed into being nurses versus being doctors, yada, yada. But it is not the way that it was in the 70s. And so you've got to adapt, and you've got to accept that that has changed, whether it makes you feel like, oh, you are denouncing racism or not. No, but it has changed because the way that we react has changed. And if the capitalist knows that, they're going to have to change the way the superstructure looks to maintain the base. So that is the reality, both in the UK and the United States, point blank.
Right.
But the third worldists don't want to look at themselves. They're like, oh wait, I'm not labor aristocracy. My skin's brown. I'm not labor aristocracy. So it's just the white people.
Mm-hmm.
Now in the United States, that means the majority of the people, right? So you're saying the majority of your country is labor aristocracy, and they're never going to benefit from socialism, and that they're more invested into imperialism. So what do we do?
Yeah, and then why are you there?
Like, then what? What do I do then? If I have decided that 60% of my country is just unsalvageable on top of the bourgeoisie, so let's say 61% of my country is unsalvageable and the only 40% are salvageable. But amongst that, there's different class lines, there's different political ideologies, because it is basically rejecting Marxism and say that I'm a nationalist first and I pretend to be a Marxist second.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
like,
sorry, but like, I think this is important. The whole world outlook that this gives you, it's an unhealthy one. It really is. It turns you to just a raging misanthrope. If you're like it, imagine. This happened to me. Like when I lived in the States, and I thought like the majority of my peers were like somehow like evil. They were tainted. Like they were deep down bad people. Like that fucks you up, man. Like it turns you into a shitty person. It turns you into like a deeply like troubled person. If you look at your the whitest form of your community, maybe not the whitest, but one of the whitest, it's your country. And if you're at war with like over half of your country, like how does that affect like the way you think, the way you like carry your day-to-day life, man? It's I'll tell you, that's not healthy.
Yeah, and then like this notion that like all this like all the burden is pushed on people in the third world now, and so like this notion that
I thought it was racist to expect Black people to do all the work for you.
Exactly.
I thought that was racism. And it is. Like, these people at the end of the day, they end up sounding like segregationists to me, and I think that's a huge problem. I think that's really concerning.
Yeah, I mean, like the notion that of overthrowing the U.S. ruling class and creating a socialist state run by an external like third world proletariat is so nonsensical to me. So like, is there no state apparatus in the U.S. like that's crazy to me. I
just also want to pick up where you were talking about like the superstructure. I think the superstructure in the United States right now has been set up to accelerate xenophobia in this country, and the rise of like hate crimes on Asian Americans is rising. And like it's deadly now. I mean, as if it wasn't before, but like it's certainly part of how capitalism and imperialism works, is that they create an underclass, a racialized underclass of people to target, and people will like uphold this type of foreign policy where we're sanctioning Eastern Asian countries. We're starving those people in like North Korea, and like they're trying to wage war against China right now. And I've been saying it for a while that we need to watch out for this. And I've been trying to like hold my liberal friends to account for their, critical or uncritical support of Democratic politicians. Like the biggest red flag to me was when Kamala Harris was talking about, we've got to deal with China. Girl, what's that mean? What are you talking about?
How do we deal with a country just, doing what it's got to do for itself. What is that? What does that mean?
Well, I think
Yeah.
we should turn to this idea. I think we should attack this notion of that the most revolutionary sector is the most oppressed. I think we should
Like
what were you gonna say?
that's one of the like the seeds that grows into third worldism. Like there's a conception, and it comes like before I said this. Hugh Newton, huge revolutionary, a lot of respect. Every revolutionary, other revolutionary, I got critics. I got critics of Stalin. If we want to talk about them, we'll talk about them. But something that I think Huey Newton had a problem, where one of the points where he missed, was that he looked to only organize the most revolutionary sector, right? And that's commendable. I get where he's coming from, but that's something that's like very endemic to like the feelings of like radical academics. Like a lot of radical academics are like, oh, we got to go to like the black trans women who are disabled and they have cancer. And it's like it gets to some pretty ridiculous stuff. It's like you got to organize the masses. The masses are by definition the majority.
Right.
Okay. If you don't organize the majority, like, okay, you're working against an enemy that is better armed, right? Better educated, better positioned. They control the state. The bourgeoisie control the state. The only way you can unseat them, the only way you can overthrow them, is if you have the majority of the country or the majority of the population, or whatever we're looking at, organized against them, because they have everything else, right? They have a military, they have economic control, they have the state. So, if you only go into the most oppressed, if you're only looking to organize like the people with the worst of the worst conditions, that's not a winning strategy, right? You can start with that. Like if for some reason that's like the strategic point to go to get a party started, sure, go for it. But you gotta aspire, right? Like we're Marxists because we aspire to take control of the state. And if you're gonna do that, you need to go to the masses, and the masses are the majority.
Right. And I think I just want to make this one point real quick, and we'll go to Kayla. I think that instead of focusing on based on you're the most oppressed based on your on this or that identity is a mistake, because you're leaving out a lot of people, and it's just not really materialist. And I think what we need to start doing is start looking at people as the people who are the most revolutionary are the people who have been promised things, material things, and it was either taken away or they didn't get it. Those are the most revolutionary sectors, and that's the majority of the people. Those are the masses. That's the proletariat. I think that's how we have to start looking at it.
It's very, very simple. The only revolutionary class is the class that controls the economy. And who's the one that's doing all the work? It's the proletariat. That's it. Revolutionary class is not who you think has the hardest time, who you think, feels bad. It's not the lumpen proletariat, because who do they live off of? They live off of the proletariat. They're like a little leech on the proletariat.
You have to be careful. People think that just means black person. It doesn't mean black person. It means criminal. It means people who live off like stealing.
Who literally live off the proletariat. They exist outside of the legal economy, but they still live off the proletariat. Who are they selling drugs to? They're selling it to the proletariat. Who are they selling sex to? They're selling it to the proletariat. Who's buying it? Proletariat. It is, the lumpen and the proletariat are working with each other. And maybe the bourgeoisie pops in a little bit with the lumpen. They fund the lumpen. Go ahead, but ultimately, it is the proletariat that controls the economy. This is the only revolutionary class. That's it. There's not a revolutionary race. There's not a revolutionary nation. There's not a revolutionary gender.
There's not a revolutionary identity. There's just a class.
It is a class, and it is the proletariat. Punto. Point blank.
Boom. Period.
I think that what you said just now, there's not a proletariat race, is like the biggest takeaway I hope people get from this is we have to stop categorizing our revolution and our politics and our futures.
Stop being a woke segregationist.
Exactly.
Stop being a woke segregationist. That's like, yeah, we have to stop doing it, because we're just reinforcing like race science. And look where race science has got us. Look where race science has got us.
You got us at third worldism.
Yeah. But I know Kayla has to go soon, so I want to knock out these last two topics that we got. So I want to talk about how patriotism was progressive in Latin America and how it can be here in the United States. So who wants to take that first?
Go ahead, Kayla.
Well, here's the thing. I think that in many different countries of Latin America, things are very different. But I can tell you one thing about Peru, just for the sake of it. And so a lot of Americans are very weird. Like, I think, natives, and I can't speak for natives in the US, but, some of them consider themselves by the nation that they are, and some of them consider themselves Americans. It's really up to them. But at least in Peru, everyone, whether native or not, most of them consider themselves Peruvian, and they consider themselves proud Peruvians. And despite its colonial history, like one of the largest demographic in Peru are native people. Then you have mestizos, then you have Black people, then you have Asian descent people. They all consider themselves Peruvian, and they all want, are all looking to fight better for Peru. So what does the Communist Party of Peru do? The name of the Communist Party is literally Red Fatherland, like literally Red Patria Roja. They are, Peruvian patriots, and that's also a line that we hold here in the Party of Communist USA, is that we reject nationalism. We see it as a, as or Michael Parenti calls it the super patriot, but we see it as a bourgeois ideology. It is reactionary, and we reject that, but we support patriotism because we love our fellow American. We love our people. We love our working class. And that's why we're Marxists. We want better for them. We want to build a better world in our country. And the fact of the matter that a lot of people, these third worldists and a lot of these woke radlibs don't want to admit is their neighbors, Black and brown, call themselves Americans. Their neighbors, Black or brown, celebrate the 4th of July and hold barbecues and come out with their neighbors. They celebrate the fucking Veterans Day.
They celebrate Thanksgiving.
Memorial Day. They still do. They can celebrate Thanksgiving Day. And whether we could say whether or not we should support these, there's many reactionary aspects of the working class that we're not going to enable and we're not going to feed. But, one of the biggest lessons we could take away with, I guess, looking at is Sendero Luminoso and, the massacre at Lucanamarca, which we'll get into because a little bit later when we talk about our show, we talk about that. But the massacre at Lucanamarca was, they were pushing their culture, the cultural revolution. What they thought was the proper analysis of the cultural revolution is not letting the people celebrate, these, what's rooted in colonialism or what's rooted in the, bourgeois idea of the nation, their national holidays, their formation of their village. And when the people said, well, fuck you, we've been celebrating this for years, and you're not going to come here and tell us that we're not celebrating it.
Don't get between rural people and their booze, man. It's a bad idea.
So
duly noted.
You're not going to win the working class when you're burning American flags or you're saying
Right.
death to all the troops. You're not going to win them. You're not you're just going to push yourself further.
We're
and
spelling it
further.
with 3 Ks.
That shit's cringe, dude. It's
So-
just cringe. I don't know what to say.
So
Stop
cringe.
being cringe.
Nobody's going to say, hey, that looks cool. Because the thing about the new left is in the rad libs is that they're used to being unpopular. They think to be revolutionary is to be rejected,
Yes.
constantly rejected in society. And that's what they push forward, but that's literally the opposite of what you need to be doing. And
That's
so
like
what we
that's the
want-
least revolutionary thing you could do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we do is we, highlight positive aspects and, revolutionary aspects of Americanism, like May Day, or the fact of like National Women's Day that was founded here in New York City. These are the positive aspects that we need to be highlighting. The 8-hour work day, minimum wage.
Right.
These are the positive things of our country. And yes, we reject the reactionaryism, but that's another thing. That was pushed by the bourgeoisie. That was created by the bourgeoisie. 8-hour workday, labor history, Women's Day, that was created by the workers. And so there's two, there's different aspects of Americanism. And I reject nationalism. I reject the reactionary bourgeois, highlights of Americanism. But I will embrace and I will uplift for my fellow American that I know loves their country. I will uplift our positive aspects. And that's the only way that you're going to do it, because nobody is going to unite with you in destroying their country. Nobody's going to unite with you in tearing their country down and saying that they hate their country. At least the vast majority won't. And so if you want to go ahead and continue to be unpopular, see how many people join you. Don't be surprised when fascism wins.
There you go.
Black Hammer.
Black Hammer is just like a caricature at that point, man. Like, but like
I know.
you see that in a lot of parties and a lot of organizations. Like you saw that with the Workers' World. You see it with the Revolutionary Communist Party of the United
Yeah.
States. You see it with a lot of parties who are just deeply confused. It's very sad to see. Like I have an interesting perspective where like I organized in the U.S. in the limited fashion that I could, and then I came here. Man, it's really really sad to see like how much confusion there is there, because like there's a lot of potential and it gets lost when it's squandered that way. But all right, I'm gonna bring my this flag up here again, because like you know what that says? Patriótica, right? Patriotic. The working people, when you have a union and they go out and march for better wages or for this or that thing, what flag do they take? They take the flag of their country, right? When if you go to any slum here in Chile, above every house, what will you see? You'll see the Chilean flag. Like you get one of these like rad libs like who like who are like, oh, the state, the nation is like a bourgeois concept, and patriotism is just used to confuse the workers. Go to a working class neighborhood, you'll see the flag everywhere, right? Those conceptions just melt away, man. And I remember when I was in the United States, I would like be driving down the street, going to the supermarket or whatever. There's homeless people. What do the homeless people have like above their fucking home, like above their tent? Very, very common. You see the American flag. Like you see that when they feel that they have like nothing left, they retreat to myth. They retreat to aspirations. They retreat to those lofty ideas that are in the national spirit, in the myth of the nation. And if you go to someone who has nothing left but like the feeling of belonging to a country, and you tell them no, your country's bad, you lost them. There's nothing else you say after that will convince them that socialism is for them,
because you are attacking their identity. That's what people also forget. Like, that is their nation. That is, if they have nothing, they have their nation, they have their identity, and you're just saying that your identity is inherently bad, which is not the approach that we need to take at all. It's not the approach that's going to win you any favors. And that's why, like, you notice a lot with a lot of white people when you explain, like, when liberals try to explain like white privilege and stuff, the immediate reactions that they have are all about class, right? They're like, but I'm poor. White privilege hasn't stopped me from losing my home. White privilege hasn't stopped me from losing my job. It's all about class. And that's what we got to use to unite us. But for some reason, people don't. And that doesn't mean to say that you need to, like, I don't know, go ahead and put on a white cape because you want to convince the racist, like, I mean, like a white hood or whatever.
that's not what we're saying.
No one's saying that at all. But it is through the class struggle that workers find that they have more in common than they have the disagreements. It is through the worker struggle where men and women can unite, where Black and white and Latino and Asian and Native can all unite and become, one together. It is through this struggle to build a better world. That you're never going to do that when you approach it as everything you are is inherently bad. Also, your labor aristocracy. So even though you're living paycheck to paycheck, you benefit from imperialism. Like, go ahead and go and tell somebody here.
Go tell people that in a trailer park. Go ahead.
Go tell them they benefit from imperialism because the tin their house is made out of was actually sucked out of the mines in Chile. Like, they will literally tell you to go fuck yourself, and you would deserve it.
Right.
I just want to say before we sign you off, Kayla, that I asked my mom earlier. I said, if somebody told you to go organize white communities, what makes you, like, who do you think is saying that? I was like, if Donald Trump said go organize white communities, and
what are the implications behind that, like that saying that?
Yeah, and she was like, sounds a little suspicious. Why can't we
it sounds like the Klan.
All communities? And my mom has not read a lick of Marx, to my knowledge, but I was like, she gets it. Yeah. It's pretty. So it's not hard. It's not.
There's one more topic that we want to touch on before we sign off officially.
Do we have time?
Kayla,
do you have time?
Just it's one more. It's one more, and I think we should cover it about how the what the left in the United States can learn from the left in Latin America, and how we can stand in.
Well, I think we've been touching it. You got, like, patriotism has a progressive character. You have to grab onto that, right? Third worldism, you know, the conclusions that the reason why people arrive at the conclusion of third worldism, they exist here. You know, people come here and they say the Chilean working class is bought off and reactionary, and you cannot organize it, right? I think we have been talking about it.
You know,
I mean,
I would say
when I
that
proposed that topic, this is the stuff I was going to talk about.
I
Yeah.
will say that the third worldists tend to say that, oh, well, it's because they have imperialism to unite themselves against that. But if we look at Peru, Peru doesn't need imperialism to explain why it is the way it is now. They have the national bourgeoisie and they have their comprador class that exists enough to exist alone. Without imperialism, they would still, you know, be sucking and exploiting the Peruvian people as they are now. So in that specific context, like the Peruvians, yes, to a degree, we could talk about, you know, transnational companies, but why did the transnational companies get away with so much? Because their national bourgeoisie or their comprador class allows them to. They allow them to just, hey, yeah, go ahead. We're not going to raise the minimum wage on our workers. In fact, you know, you can fire them whenever you want. And so that's not what's going to unite the Peruvian people in fighting for socialism, because it doesn't. What we know that the Marxist parties do now to address that is fighting for a better Peru, or what they call them. They do this in Chile, which is like refound or recreate our nation. Refundar el Chile, refundar el Peru.
I heard I forget who, but I heard someone like with a good translation of it. National renewal, something like that. Like you just like start the country over, basically. That's the idea. Like you gotta start over.
A rebirth.
National rebirth, something like that.
Yeah.
Like it's like a baptism. Our country needs to go through a little baptism. It needs to find
like that.
Yeah, we have to in order to get rid of like the bourgeoisie culture, we need to replace it with the proletarian culture. And we need and the only way to do that is to take state power.
The working class needs to baptize their countries like Jorge Masvidal baptized Darren.
And here's the thing: Peru is one of the most diverse countries in Latin America too. Like we, just like any part of Latin America, you know, there are white people that exist there. There are Italian, Spanish descent white people. There are Japanese people. There are Native people. There are mixed race people. There are Black people. Peru is a very diverse country, and what they all have in common is being Peruvian and loving Peru and wanting a better future for Peru. Now, people disagree on how that actually looks like, and I, you know, believe that the socialists will win. But at the end of the day, it's still a love for your nation and uniting all Peruvian people, despite whether you're Asian descent, you're Native descent, you live in the city, you live on the coast, you live in the mountain. At the end of the day, they're all Peruvians, and they need to build a better Peru. They need to build a Peru that supports the Peruvian working class and not the Peruvian bourgeoisie. And that's something that needs to be pushed forward here too. Another thing that I think is the future for all of the Americas is a plural national state. I think that we live, you know, we're not Europe, we're not, you know, African nations, which might have a different nature of how their nations developed, how they came to be. We have a very specific history, all of us here in the Americas. There's no fucking exception to that, maybe because one's a little bit more imperialist than the other. We have all developed the same way. And so I believe that the answer for us to all exist and go forward, the socialist answer in the Americas, is a plurinational in America. It is what Bolivia has done.
Yeah.
I mean, we explicitly proposed that here. We're like, we have the Bolivian term of plurinationalism. We're like, we need like for those who don't know, in essence, it means that in the Constitution, like the frame of a constitution for most countries is that like it recognizes who the nation state is for. So like, you know, this is the German state, this is the French state, this is a English state in the United Kingdom, etc. But a plurinational would recognize a state of nations, of several nations. So you'd have, for example, in Chile, you'd have the Mapuche, you'd have the Chileans, you'd have the Aymara, etc. And the idea is that once it is constitutionally recognized that there is a duty to all of these different nations, one would expect that then reflects itself in, for example, the educational curriculum and in the kind of media that's produced and stuff like that. That's the hope, and that's what we've seen in Bolivia. But you know, it can't just stop at like, oh, you know, we changed the constitution. Now the national name's there, so we're done. Nah, it's like an actual, like, the plurinationalism embodies more than just the constitutional change. So that's like the seed of it all.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I think I think it, you know, a lot of these ultra leftists or like third worldists like to point out that there's like no revolutionary culture, or there's no like revolutionary history in the United States. There's no like
That's just
the US
false.
the
It's not
US
true.
has no proletarian culture. We do indeed have a proletarian culture. It's just we're ruled by the
Dude,
bourgeoisie.
American culture is so proletarian. The working classes throughout the rest of the world mimic it. Like, you know, the fucking the blue jeans. Like that's not a rich man's fucking like pants.
Right, I
It's
know. It's I mean, we have we have a proletarian culture here, and I think a lot of people adopt and confuse bourgeoisie culture, and they don't recognize the proletarian culture, and that's because the bourgeoisie controls the state. They're in power here, so we do have the primary contradiction here is between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat that exists here in the United States, and the only way to do away with bourgeoisie culture is to replace it with the proletarian culture, and the only way to do that is to take state power, and that's what we need to work towards, and that's why we need a
Caleb looks like
revolutionary
somebody
vanguard party.
Point your finger. Yes, that's the shit right there.
There you go.
It looks like you're giving Eric the bird. I was like, what the hell? What's going on?
The bird.
But yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap, guys. Thank you so much for being with us. Why don't you remind everyone where they can find your work?
So actually, and the whole point why we came here today is so we talked about, you know, proletarian culture and revolutionary history in the United States. Well, what me and Red are doing together is we have started a show for which can be found on Anticonquista that will be coming out soon, called Espíritu de Tupac, which means spirit of Tupac. Tupac Amaru, and we'll explain that later, but he was a native revolutionary in Peru who started to set up an uprising against Spanish monarchy, Spanish hegemony in South America. And so we feel like Espíritu de Tupac, the spirit of Tupac, and that, you know, revolutionary fervor, the changing and overthrowing of a oppressor class is something that will be emulated throughout all of American history. And so our show is going to talk about the rich proletarian history of all of the countries of the Americas. That includes the United States and Canada. So it's going to be of all of the Americas and the Latin Caribbean. So we can catch that on Anticonquista. But again, you know, I write for Anticonquista. I make videos sometimes for Anticonquista. You could find my work on and yeah, just stay tuned.
Briefly on that, I'm not as optimistic as Kayla. Like we're working on it. It looks like it's more. We bit off more than we could chew as quickly as we thought. But we're getting at it. It will come out. Don't worry about that.
Well, we're very excited to see that, and
hold on to that excitement because
I'm holding on
around for a while.
I'm holding on, and I will continue to hold on because I know you guys will produce a great show. And
we're gonna pinch our nips until it's done. Okay?
Yeah,
and just let us know if there's anything we can do to help you.
Yeah, if we can line it up where we come on
skills.
again when it's closer to fruition, you know, promote a little bit, that would be cool.
Oh, I love that.
But otherwise,
it's exactly what we need right now. So
yeah.
we love to see that. We love
it's like there's not a lot of like.
Before you leave us and break my heart, could you also each of you recommend one book that helped correct some of this third worldist outlook thing?
Good idea.
This one's good.
Wait, what's that?
No, it's in Spanish. You can't find it in English.
Oh.
Give me a second, Kayla. You go for it.
I'm trying to think of third worldist things. I have a couple of books actually, and they kind of touch on different topics. But one that I recommend, I think I broke out of my third worldism a little bit, but I think that every third worldist should read it. Is Liu Shaoxi's How to Be a Good Communist, and there's different chapters in that. It's a very good one, and it also touches upon about the folks who decide to leave parties every time a little scandal happens, and
Mm.
just, you know, say all parties are bad in America because I disagree with one thing that my party did or whatever.
New discipline.
Why that is not being a good communist. The other one is Turn the Guns Around, and that is by John Catalin Noto. Now he is, you know, in the Workers' World Party, but it is a very good book to give you some history on the U.S. military, and just about some of the ways that it is possible to organize the U.S. military and how communists have done it before.
Yes, that's very crucial. A lot of people overlook that. So thank you so much.
I have a book by Parenti, but I wouldn't recommend. This was good, but for Third World, I would recommend Super Patriotism.
That's good. I watched the video, the lecture.
You can watch the video. I think you'll get out a lot of this similar stuff out of it. But you know, Parenti, he never shied away from calling himself a patriot, and that's surprising. You know, the amount of people who defend Parenti online is surprising me, because sometimes you hear, you know, Third World is be like, oh, it's Parenti, cool, and I'm just like, do you know what he?
Do you know
He
what
doesn't agree with it, man.
written
Yeah.
about?
But yeah, no, Super Patriotism, either the book or the online speech that he gave when it was published, fantastic. You know, it's important to understand, like, the American communists in their past and in the present, they don't shy away from the patriotic label. So you know what? It's time for, you know, American communists to stop being chicken shit little cowards, and, like, you know, I don't care if liberals are gonna scream at you, man. You gotta own it. So
Exactly.
since I
You gotta
Go-
remember, we gotta push our class forward. It's not about you. It's not about how much followers you have online. It's not about how woke you are. It's about doing what's necessary to win over our class. And if you don't want to do it, then at least get out the way.
Boom.
yeah, like, at least admit you're not a communist.
Boom. Perfect place to leave it. We look forward to having you guys again, having you on again soon. So
Thank you so much for having
thank
us.
you so much. This is great.
Thank you for staying extra, Kayla. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Good night, guys.